Hello friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages. This is Cheese of Ages here, and we're going to be talking about myths in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And this is going to be a recurring thing, as per the series titling. I probably assigned it down below. But this isn't going to be something that occurs super frequently. It's just going to occur whenever I feel like it. But today we're going to be talking about the myth that prompted me to make this video and little sort of series, and that's assurance with medicine. It is a common misconception in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition community that assurance in medicine is any good whatsoever, to the point that whenever you bring up building to medicine on the Pathfinder 2e Reddit, there will be a handful or more of people that talk about taking assurance in medicine as if it is a thing you should take, as if it's a default part of the build. Which, in fact, if you're specializing or investing at least moderately into medicine, it's arguably completely useless for you, especially if you're specializing. So let's go into what assurance, the skill feat, does, so we can break down why it's nearly completely useless for medicine. When you take assurance, you pick a skill, and then you have the option to, instead of rolling that skill check, you take a 10 plus your proficiency modifier, ignoring all penalties and all bonuses. So your ability score can't apply to this, your skill kits can't apply to this, nobody can aid this roll, but also it ignores things like multiple attack penalty or the frightened condition. So it's actually pretty good. For the majority of skills, this means if you're targeting like a goon level enemy that is like average party level -2, it will sometimes, but not always, automatically succeed, depending on if you're targeting the right save. Well, their highest save might not fall to assurance, even on an APL -2 enemy. The main function of assurance is to avoid penalties, and also to avoid rolling really low and failing the DC. And so here's where we encounter the problem. Both of these are nearly completely useless functions for medicine. In an out-of-combat situation, you're not usually suffering any penalties whatsoever. In the majority of adventure paths, nothing will give you a penalty to medicine checks outside of combat, or a blanket penalty to checks outside of combat. There is some cause to be finding this useful for if you're using battle medicine with it in combat, because you might be frightened, but we'll be going into that a little bit later. And also, avoiding the chance of failure is also relatively useless as well, because you could go with the lower DC of treat wounds and still get the desired effect. One might argue, but the size of the healing. But the DC 15 is a viable amount of healing for a treat wounds check all the way to level 10. So, no problem there. By the time you need a higher tier of healing, you mathematically can move up to it and still have the same reliability as the DC 15 with your roll. And there's another thing that causes that to be especially true, and that is not factored into a lot of the math that is lobbied in favor of assurance in medicine, and that's the risky surgery feat. Now let me just start off with this explanation by curtailing that one or two guys on Reddit that say it's subjective or DM fiat whether you can use risky surgery with assurance or not. No, it is not. If your GM is saying you can use risky surgery with assurance, he is outright changing rules as written and ignoring how the ability actually functions, as assurance is not a roll, and risky surgery's effects all specifically call out that they only trigger on rolls. There is no debate about it. If something is triggered by something, and that something doesn't happen, the thing triggered by that something can't happen because it wasn't triggered. That's like saying a trap will just randomly go off with no influence from any outside factors, including internal mechanical failure. It's just not happening. If a trigger doesn't occur, the thing that happens when it's triggered doesn't happen. And with risky surgery, what happens when you use it? Let's read the text. When you treat wounds, you can deal a D8 of slashing damage to your patient just before applying the effects of treat wounds. If you do, you gain a +2 circumstance bonus to your medicine check to treat wounds, and if you roll a success, you get a critical success instead. So, assurance doesn't work with this. You can't get a bonus to assurance via the +2 because assurance doesn't include bonuses, and assurance isn't a roll, so the only other effect of risky surgery doesn't work either. So, let's just ignore that random befuddler that keeps trying to argue that this is any debate when it clearly is not, by any stretch of the imagination. And break down why risky surgery makes assurance in medicine kind of garbage outside combat. And you can probably guess, but might not fully understand the scope of it, of how drastically this nerfs assurance in medicine. As a +2 bonus on what the baseline DC is a 15 is pretty huge. And if you're not familiar with what the crit success and success functions on treat wounds are, a success is 2d8 hit points healed and removes the wounded condition, and a critical success is 4d8 hit points and removes wounded condition instead. So this is a net buff to the healing dice. While you do deal a 1d8 damage before you heal the 4d8, and sometimes that might swing adversely against you where you roll high on the damage and low on the healing. That's a very niche case. Usually it's going to be at least a little bit of net healing that is heightened above that. Presuming you have average results on all dice of 4 each, that's going to be a net +4 healing. What we basically have here is a +2 to hitting a 15, and if you hit the 15, you get an additional +10, which is the normal degree of success upgrade. However, to pay for it, you could inflict 1 to 8 points of damage to the target, potentially resulting in you not healing on very niche occasions. That's going to be a statistical minority here. So let's break down some math to talk about more statistical anomalies. What does this actually mean to your success rate out of combat in comparison to assurance? And to do that, we're going to look over the data linked in the video description, provided to me by somebody counter-arguing that assurance is good for people with really low wisdom modifiers, which is only a little true, and we're going to go over why. So what's the success rates with this? Well, you notice from the chart that assurance can't work until about 3rd level unless you're a rogue that somehow uses his first skill increase at 2nd level into medicine. So we'll just assume 3rd level is as soon as it can work. Because up until then, at 2nd level, you've got a 14. That won't hit a 15 with assurance. As soon as you hit 3rd, you're bounding around at a 15 minimum. So there's the point in which you will succeed. And also on this chart, you've got max proficiency and delayed proficiency. So what are the success rates for 10 wisdom, 14 wisdom, and max wisdom at 3rd level? What is your bonus according to this chart? +7 here, with no wisdom, but max proficiency. At middling, you've got a +9. And at max wisdom and max proficiency, you've got an 11. So let's add 2 to each of these increments. +2 to 7 is 9. So with no modifier, at 3rd level, using risky surgery, you succeed on a roll of 6 or higher, meaning you have a 75% chance to critically succeed with no wisdom modifier, and you only have a 25% chance of failing with no modifier. And wait, there's more. This isn't even including the bonus for the healer's kit you might have, the expanded one that gives you a +1 item bonus. So that actually succeeds on a 5 or better, meaning you actually have an 80% chance of success at 3rd level with no modifier, but max proficiency and risky surgery. This same chance of success applies to a 14 modifier in wisdom at this point with only trained proficiency in medicine, and if you have no modifier and only trained, your chances of success are 70%. So let's look at this comparison here. In the worst case scenario, taking assurance when you have no modifier and only trained proficiency guarantees your success, your baseline success. If you took risky surgery instead, you have a 70% chance to critically succeed on the check. However, it inflicts 1d8 points of damage. So there is that small chance that the d8 will roll high and you'll roll really low. However, there's also the chance that you'll roll really low on the damage d8 and roll really high on the 4d8. On average, you have a 70% chance to raise your healing by 4. But generally speaking, statistically, it can screw you, but most likely it will not. More often you'll break even or do better, statistically speaking. So, essentially, you're taking a feat to avoid a 30% chance of failure, and also that risk of rolling really high on the damage and really low on the healing. So arguably, this is still okay in this specific situation. But let's remember, this is the worst case scenario. This is no modifier, no level of proficiency. That chance of success that you're mitigating goes down to 20% if you have expert training. If you have 14 and expert training, that goes down another 2%, down to 10%. And then if you are actually a super specialized towards wisdom, basically have to roll a natural 1 to fail this. You basically have to crit fail it to not crit succeed on it with risky surgery. Because we're looking at this freaking +11, plus you've got the +2, and then you've got an additional +1. So you pretty much you succeed on it too. You need to roll a 1 to not crit succeed this if you're max wisdom, max proficiency. 3 or worse if you're only 16 in wisdom. And this is the minimum level in which assurance can function. So essentially, from 14 and above, you're trying to avoid not that chance of failure, because the chances of failure is almost non-existent. You're trying to avoid that d8 coming up high and damaging, and the rest of those 3d8 not granting significant healing over that. And let's not forget, even if you don't heal any damage, you still remove the wounded condition. So situationally, even not healing anything with the treat wounds is not that terrible. But there's still an argument to be made that this feat is kind of okay in a vacuum. In theory, that d8 might not cause you to get as much healing as you really need to in this clutch situation, and the worst might happen. It might happen. Or you might get a decent amount of healing from it. But remember, we're talking about 3rd level here, and that DC 15 doesn't scale up unless you choose to scale it up. By level 5, which is only 2 levels from now, even the untrained guy is pretty much guaranteed to critically succeed on out-of-combat treat wounds, factoring in, of course, that d8 damage nerfing the crit. But Assurance can't crit succeed on a DC 15 until 9th level with max proficiency. With delayed proficiency on the chart, you can only crit on that when you hit 11th level. But let's put the nail in the coffin here, at least for out-of-combat purposes. take a look at all of that data and information at level 3 and at level 5 and compute your chances of success without risky surgery at 3rd and 5th for those various increments of modifier shown in the chart. Not using risky surgery lowers your chance of success by 10%. Look at all of them, do the math in your head. Does this seem like something you need assurance for at this point? Looking over the data, is this 15 so hard to succeed at any point reliably that you need assurance for it? Post 3rd level, remember, because assurance doesn't work until 3rd level. There's a chin scratcher. But hey, you might say, you're only talking about the level 15 increment. At level 6, assurance can hit 20, which gives you plus 10 to healing, which is pretty much what risky surgery does, but reliably. Let's do the math. Your total bonus at level 6 with delayed proficiency on the chart is plus 10, not including the plus 3 you'll get from your item bonus and risky surgery. So it's actually a 13. So you succeed on a risky surgery out of combat DC 20 on a 7 or higher with no modifier. Worst case scenario, you only have a 35% chance of failure. If you somehow, at level 6, do not have the kit, that's a 40% chance of failure and is thus viable for assurance. But I'm just going to shut that down right away, because if you're in a campaign in which you're needing to be reliable with assurance, with no wisdom modifier, and bare bones training, and your GM hasn't given you a +1 item bonus item in medicine, he's doing it wrong, and thus you're playing in a situation that is the absolute worst to the point of near impossibility. You're in a terrible, terrible situation that is not to be considered baseline. And let's just go ahead and slap this with the higher scores shtick. If you've got a 14 in wisdom, let's have a +2 to it. You critically succeed 75% of the time, presuming I'm a bonus again. And if you have a 16, that's 80%. If you're full wisdom, that's 85% chance of critically succeeding on the 20. At the same point at which you can get an assured 20 on the freaking assurance roll at level 6. So, as per normal with Pathfinder, a mathematical assumption at one level remains true at various increments. At the point in which assurance comes online for treating the trained, all of the same math is true when you go up the next increment, and it can succeed automatically on a 20. The same applies when you can automatically succeed on a 25, and so on and so on. It's always going to remain true. All of those previous statements have been said. And look at the chart. By the point in which you can assurance a 20, if you have a middle-of-the-road 14 wisdom, you are virtually guaranteed to succeed the DC 15 without risky surgery, because you have a 13 to it with max proficiency and 14, and even with delayed proficiency on this chart at 6th, you still have a 13 here, according to this, not including item bonuses, of course, because so you'll have a 14 according to this chart at 6th level. So if you have middle of the road 14 wisdom, you only fail on a 1 without risky surgery on the 15 increment. And even the 10 wisdom guy at 6th level is throwing around an 11. So he succeeds on a 4 or higher. Without item bonus, 5 or higher. So even he has a 75% chance of succeeding on the baseline treat wounds check for 2d8 plus removing wounded. So, where's assurance being super useful here? I'm arguing. So the question is, why is assurance medicine treated as such a default part of the build for medicine when even for a 10 wisdom character, it's only marginally useful outside of combat? Well, let's talk about another little chapter of this discussion, and that's use in combat, as risky surgery can't be used in combat as it doesn't apply to battle medicine. Now, the negating penalties part of assurance comes into factor way more often in combat, as you're likely to get hit with status effects to debuff your skill checks, like Frightened and Stupefy. But then you run into the problem that we've already established, that DC 15 is always an option forever. It's viable for a lot of levels of the game, and it is relatively easy and swift within the level progression to make trivial. Look at this 14 to 20 wisdom delayed proficiency, level 5. You have a plus 12 modifier, not including the plus 1 item bonus from a healer's kit. So let's just go with keeping in mind that plus 1 can effectively negate a penalty in this particular mathematics. 12 to it. To hitting that 15, you succeed on a 3 or higher. Even if you're slapped with a -2 penalty, you still succeed on a 5 or higher. With a middling wisdom of 14, according to this chart, the penalties don't really have any consequential effect on your odds of success. Once in a blue moon, that 10% reduced chance from that -2 will screw you. But now we're talking about taking a feat to mitigate a situation that will sometimes happen and sometimes have an effect. That doesn't seem very good. I mean, if you're a 14 wisdom delayed wisdom guy throwing around a 12, 13 with the item bonus, keep in mind, and you want to hit the 20 DC for the plus 10 healing, then it's applicable. But if you're taking a bunch of penalties, is it really worth trying to get that increment? Is it worth taking a feat when you could just go for the DC 15 and heal 10 less hit points? These are the things we must debate here. But you might be thinking, wait a minute, Cheese, why are you talking about the 14 increment and not the 10 increment? Technically, isn't this much better if your modifier is like 2 lower because the penalties will hit you harder? There's a reason for that, and I'm just about to blow this wide open, this argument that assurance is good for really low modifiers. And for things like athletics, like having 10 strength, you could take assurance athletics and still successfully trip goons. For medicine, however, this is not super the case. We've already gone over how out of combat assurance medicine is in comparison to risky surgery, and how quickly it goes offline out of combat when you're not dealing with penalties. Now, here's a problem in this scenario of suggesting that in combat, a 10 guy will find a lot of use avoiding the penalties. He's got a 10 to wisdom, and he's invested 2 feats into a wisdom skill. This becomes less of a anomaly later levels, but a wisdom of 10, if you're interested in doing anything with medicine, is even more an anomaly later. But to use medicine in combat, you need a skill feat. Assurance is also a skill feat. So, 5th level, you have 2 skill feats. We're not counting background, because nobody's going to take a medicine skill feat background and have a 10 wisdom. That's just weird. But keep that in mind. We'll go ahead and throw that into the 5 case, because the 6 case argument, it's 2 out of 3 skill feats. Why is this 10 guy spending 2 out of 3 skill feats on a skill for an ability score he has a freaking 0 in, modifier-wise? To make it applicable? It's just strange. It's arguing that a skill feat is viable because of a niche situation in which a guy wants to be decent at healing with medicine and combat, but puts next to nothing in the ability score for doing it. And an ability score, I might remind you, also determines initiative, the ability to spot things, the ability to discern lies, and also wisdom saving throws. So yeah, in this niche case of a character that wants to do something but doesn't build his ability scores into it, but for some reason invests 2/3 of his skill feats into doing it, hey, that's okay. In situations where he's taking a penalty in combat and needs to heal somebody. And on top of all that, without the medic dedication, battle medicine only works once per day per target. So you have to be needing to heal somebody in combat, be taking penalties, and you have that ability up for the target you need to heal. So it's good in those situations, but no other point, really. Anyway, now that we've pretty much cut no wisdom guy out of the board, because why is he still not boosting wisdom at 5th to 6th level? Let's talk about why this feat is also terrible for anybody with any level of specialty. In addition to all that math we've gone through to show that it's unnecessary most of the time. If you're specializing in medicine, you have more skill feats that you need to take. So, why are you taking assurance in medicine at any point before you get these? There's battle medicine that you need to take. So, hey, we're still hammering on that point of taking up a lot of skill feat space. Battle medicine to heal in combat. You want to get that as soon as possible. It's also required for the medic dedication. Medic dedication also has another skill feat in it that's pretty okay. If you want to take that at 4th in order to get out of the medic dedication really quickly, if you went into that. And if you're a super medicine specialist, you probably went into the medic dedication, but not necessarily assured. So let's consider the medic dedication, but only a little bit. So, battle medicine, maybe the skill feat in medic, then you've got continual recovery so that you lower the cooldown on medicine. Then you want to also get ward medic at either before or after you get continual recovery, so you can multi-target your instances. Your singular treat wounds attempts can target multiple people. You want to get that. So that's already 3 skill feats that are occupying your space. Those have taken up all of your skill feat spaces that you could possibly have for 6 levels, unless you invest in a medic background, in which it encompasses 3 of the 4. If you went medic dedication and got the skill feat in there, which is pretty good, and the medic dedication to get out of it quickly, that is taking up all 4 of your possible ones, or still requiring 1 more if you don't have a medically trained background increment. After you've gotten these 3 to 4 skill feats, oh wait, no, how did I forget risky surgery? You probably want risky surgery for the +2 and the auto crit with the -1d8. The -1d8 never grows, by the way, so that's scaling to be even less of a problem over time, and every increment bump you go up, it's counteracting that even more, and the more HP your target has, the less 1d8 matters. So we've got risky surgery there. Risky surgery, I'd say, is contending for the same space as assurance for math reasons we've gone over before. So you'd probably want it. And you might debate assurance or risky surgery. We've already gone over what assurance does, so in my opinion, risky surgery is probably a priority before assurance, since it's more useful, generally speaking, especially at this point late in the progression, or technically some backgrounds give it to you first. So risky surgery can be gotten easily out of several backgrounds. So this is 4, maybe 5 skill feats you should consider before assurance medicine if you're specializing in medicine. But let's cut risky surgery out of there and just go with 3 skill feats, not going into medic, not going risky surgery. This is the soonest you can consider between assurance and risky surgery, is 3 skill feats in. Well, certain backgrounds can grant battle medicine at first level, so let's consider that. You can't get either continual recovery or ward medic until level 4 at the earliest, unless you're a rogue, but that's a niche case. Also probably maybe alchemist and other skill monkey classes, but that's not a general thing. So at earliest that you could get 2 skill feats post that would be at 4th and 6th, so you need to be 6th level to have all of these feat supports. And that's a familiar increment, because that's the point in which you can hit that DC 20 with assurance. And that is also the point in which you could probably normally hit the DC 20 pretty early. I mean, pretty easily and consistently. But you have that fallback point in which you can obliterate 15 reasonably before this. So the earliest you could conceivably consider taking assurance, if you went with the pretty critical medicine feat support to be a specialist and treat wounds, is level 8. At level 8, a pure whiz specialist could have a +2 item bonus here from another item, as it's the right level to get the item, but we're not going to consider that +2, and we're just going to go with a +1 when we're doing our little maths here. If you take assurance at level 8, you can guarantee a 20 increment, because you're 1 level shy of being able to auto-hit a 25. So your mileage may vary on that. Consider that. At next level, you'll be able to guarantee a 25. However, a specialist with max wisdom will be touting a freaking 18 with just proficiency and ability of 4 at this level. So this is reasonably achievable to even people that secondary wisdom score. So keep in mind as we compare assurance in this feat slot guaranteeing you a 20 to, if you take risky surgery out of combat, you get a 20 bonus to your treat wounds check, not even including your item bonus of +1, boosting it to 21, theoretically possibly 22. Which means, familiar math, do a little dance, make a little get down tonight. You pretty much have a virtual impossibility of not crit succeeding at a 25 at this increment. And even with only a +2 modifier, your chances of crit succeeding on the 25 increment are still pretty good, as previously mentioned in that older batch of math. So assurance is doing literally nothing at this increment, and is only arguably good a level from now. So that's not very appealing to take. We've already gone over its battles to potential statistics, but remember, you're got a +16 to 18, which means in battle, even with small penalties, you are guaranteed to be able to use medicine in some regard. You have 2 entire fallback increments at this point. The 20 increment and the 15 increment. You can choose which to use for the battle medicine check. So, taking assurance here does virtually nothing for you at the level you take it. It'll do a little something next level, at level 9, when you can assure a 25. But wait, you can only assure a 25 at level 9 if you have maximum proficiency in it. So, it falls even further behind if you only have moderate investment in the skill ranks of medicine. So it's kinda for a specialist, as we can see here, and it's also kinda for somebody that has only moderate investment, as we can see here, because of how things are scaling. This video is super long and is referencing math many times and calling back to previous points in the video many times. But I think I've kind of made my point here. This belongs nowhere within 100 billion light years of a discussion about the default build for medicine. It serves almost no function whatsoever for somebody specialized in medicine. If you're looking for minimum investment in medicine and still being useful, well, we've already demonstrated how low your modifier can go and still be really consistent. The step below what a specialist would be consistent at is still pretty viable for healing at the tier we're talking about here. If you're a tier behind a specialist, you're still healing pretty good for your level. And you could achieve consistency in that really easily. There is no point in taking assurance unless your DM drenches you with penalties and you have a fairly low modifier. But honestly, if your party GM drenches you with penalties and you have no dedicated healer, aside from the guy with a really low modifier in wisdom or poor training in medicine, you've got bigger problems, and assurance can only go so far in helping you with that. Assurance isn't a flaming dumpster fire, but with how crowded medicine support is and how little it actually does compared to all of the other options that you could take for a medicine feat, assurance is kinda a flaming dumpster fire. It's kind of useless. A little bit. Especially if you're a specialist. This should not be anywhere in the same dimension of a specialist build. Stop freaking acting like it's a default part of the medicine build. It's near useless for literally everybody. Now, I think I've proven my point. If not, say so in the comments below, and I'll correct you, because I'm right. But for the time being, I gotta roll.